welcome the president of Blue Choir, Stephanie Spicer.
Good morning, everyone. Who has been incredibly inspired this morning? Between that case study and Elaine's talk, I feel like I am ready to go and write some crazy briefs. So I'm Stephanie Spicer. I'm the president of Blue Choir. We are a 60-ish person full-service agency based out of Charlotte. I say based very loosely because we're actually remote hybrid. We have people all over the country. And I'm super, super excited here today because my background and my passion is truly brand strategy. So we're here today to talk about purpose, of course. Do we really need to rethink strategy in a post-purpose world? And we've talked, I think, as marketers for the past 10, 20 years about the power of purpose and how we need to be all in on it, and it's going to be the driver of growth. But when you look at the articles today, what you see is consumers boycotting, right? Because they see greenwashing and woke washing and all the things that, we as marketers just cringe and we don't want to see it. And then you look at inflation, and inflation is going up, and so people are making decisions not based on what's right, but based on how much things cost. So marketers are starting to second guess, do we really need to focus on purpose right now? So what we're here to talk about today, my question, I guess, to everybody and really to these lovely panelists is, have we ever really gotten purpose right? So I want to dig into that, but first I want our panelists to introduce themselves. So if you guys want to start, we'll go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Melly Hawk. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Edelman. I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit, Art Noir, that promotes racial equity in the art world. And it is wonderful to be here this morning with everyone, a very difficult act to follow. I think we'd all agree with lost class, but I'm excited for this conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Elsa Zarkas. I am VP Executive Strategy Director and Head of Strategy for RGA California. I think we were equated to hating puppies. So I hope we'll bring a digestible point of view to this issue, but it's a real pleasure to be here.
And I'm Robert Thompson, Managing Director of Digital Innovation at Walton Isaacson, a full-service agency. And while I've always been a resident digital guy, I always tell people I'm a consumer-first guy. So very interested to see what we get into discussion-wise and why brands tend to have these happy feet when it comes to brands.
Well, I guess, actually we had one question we were going to start with, but given how inspiring this morning is, we're going to flip it on its head and really start with, do we as marketers have a moral imperative to put social good in the world? Is this our responsibility? Is this something we have to do? Melly, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Moral imperative. So I think that as marketers, we have a moral imperative to try our best to do no harm. And depending on what you make and how you make it, that can actually be a really big challenge. And I think a lot of people can spend their entire careers trying to get towards that do no harm principle. In terms of a moral imperative, I actually think that purpose really is a privilege. I think it's a privilege that you earn when you have a really strong product pipeline, when you have a really strong overall marketing strategy, when you have a really deep understanding of your audience, what they need, what they want, what they're actually getting from you. I think if you try to embark on some of these things that are higher up the brand ladder without having that sorted, that's where the disconnect starts to happen. It's like if you're from New York, it's like, Eric Adams, he's nobody cares that you're dancing at a Meek Mill concert if you haven't fixed the potholes, Mayor Adams, right? So I think you have to kind of get the basics down first before you start to layer things on top of it. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
That's a great point.
So hells yes, we have moral imperative to behave responsibly and ethically. 2 reasons. So agreeing with everything you just said. So not going to belabor there, but I will say that marketers, and we're marketers, all of us here, there's such a mind-blowing amount of talent floating into the marketing industry, and we're literally getting paid to design objects and put them in mass media to shape people's behaviors and thoughts and attitudes, and so do no harm. This is Professor Galloway calls it weapons of mass distractions, right? So we have tons of responsibility to act responsibly. I'm going to talk about a different element since you captured everything so beautifully. I think the moral imperative actually, because we are such a powerful industry and a sector, the moral imperative should be applied inwardly, right? So who are we hiring into those powerful marketing departments? How are we paying them? Are we vigilant enough to close the pay equity gap for creatives of color, for women, for non-binary? How the whole operationalizing of our marketing departments, that's where the moral imperative really lies. And if we do that, if we focus there, even what kind of clients are we agreeing to work with? Right? And I think the previous speaker spoke to that wonderfully. Or where do we put our media? Are we floating media budgets to cancerous establishments like Fox News, or are we responsible and we're drawing just a little, just drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is something that I'm not going to apply myself, my talent and my people's talent towards something like this, right? So, and that's where I feel like we can make long-lasting, impactful change if we kind of ground up, rebuild marketing departments to be more diverse and equitable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think marketers delude themselves of the business they don't think they are in. So post Me Too, everyone's in the don't harass women business. Post-COVID, we're all in the healthcare business. Post-BLM, we're all in the DE&I business. Post the Gen Zennial movement, you're in the business of purpose because as a consumer, they fire you every time they make a decision for another brand because you don't have purpose, period. And I think that's the thing that's almost laughable is that the mentality of brands, they actually think they can negotiate out of it when actually they need to find and orient how they're going to align on it, and that be the foundation of fabric for how they move in the marketplace. Because this new consumer, who's basically going to rewrite the rules, if half of them have been rewritten already, have already made the decision. If you don't stand for something, which we're going to pick apart, fact check, cancel culture you, Instagram it, post it, meme it, then you're just not the brand that's worth our dollars and how we're spending. And that movement has already been happening. So to your point of who we putting in these top marketer positions, when you start to look at the evolution of the CMO, and the CMO had to be a creative type, a data type, a technologist type. They need to go back to the beginning when these companies were built in the 40s and 50s. They were grounded on a singular aim or ideal around some sort of purpose more or less for good than just for profit. And I think that's the thing that's almost humorous when you watch the actions of the top marketer. It's like, do you not understand the business that you're actually in? Because the consumer is actually just going to tell you.
So with that cancel culture mentality, let's say you do have a client who has a product that they haven't defined a clear purpose, and you know the consumer is going to find the place where they can pick them apart. How do you, as a marketer, start to address that? What can you do to help them along?
I think the first thing is there are always competing mentalities. There's the mentality of the company when it was founded, the founder. There's the mentality of the people who are now running it. And then there's the mentality of the consumer saying who you need to be. And I think what typically is happening is these mentalities are at odds and they're not unified. So it's a push and pull between, and how many of you have clients that, like, they sometimes seem confused on who they are? Just show of hands. Okay, see, this is what we're dealing with. Client wants to be X, you're actually Y, and you're sitting and looking at it, I'm like, yeah, but you're not that company, you're not that brand. It's almost like saying, like, yeah, you're not that chick. So that's the thing that has to get sorted out, and I'll open it up to my fellow panelists if they have some perspective, but that's the biggest thing I see is that they're competing with an identity based upon the roots of how they were built to whom is now running it, and then the consumer looking at them saying, it's a good thing you make a great product because the marketing just kind of sucks.
Yeah, I'll talk about, I think, two things not to do. I know you're asking what to do, but in the context of purpose and being too happy and excited about it, the first thing to not do is if your challenge is up the funnel in the awareness and consideration realm, if that's the marketing objective, fixing it by co-opting a societal issue and thinking, oh, now we're going to tell the world, now everyone will know who we are and what we're selling and why they should pay a little bit more for our product versus the competitor. That's not, it might work. It's a very short-sighted move. It's irresponsible from a business perspective, right? And they're going to tear you apart on social, right? But unfortunately, there's this conflating of, we need to get our name out there in the market. Oh, our audience cares about this societal issue. Let's attach ourselves to that. Okay, so and then the love child of the first one is when we're trying, well-intending strategists are trying to use the marketing organization as the backdoor into turning an entire company into purpose-oriented company, right? If purpose is not built in to the operations, to supply chain, to HR, to finance, if it's not there and that's how the company is operating, regardless of marketing, then marketing is not the first place to start, right? That's when we're getting into a lot of trouble, and we must establish, I think that's what you were saying, we must establish commercial viability in the market that is detached from societal issues. Once we've done that, then maybe, if everything else is in check, maybe we can start talking about societal purpose.
Yeah, I think that, I agree with a lot of that. In terms of cancel culture, because you said the C word, I think that risk analysis is important, right? And understanding like your brand, your client's risk tolerance is extremely important. I think when we look at risk, we look at it through like many of those different avenues you mentioned, Dale. It is like, you have to analyze it through like the lens of employees, like, how does this match up with your HR practices? Like all of those things come into play when you're looking at like how risky is this really? And from there, it really does, it's a decision, right? We say as strategists, our job is to make choices. And we need to understand the risk behind those choices as we guide our clients to make the best decisions possible. But I do think that having that, again, to me, it's all about coherence, right, and harmony, right? If you have coherence and harmony across all the different layers of your business, you can find surprising avenues sometimes. I really think you're worth your salt if like you have an idea that like didn't actually ever make it. It was like, oh, it's ahead of its time or two. But this is something that didn't manifest quite, but I had a hair removal client a long time ago. And I remember doing like I was like digging through all of their Amazon reviews, and people were writing things like, as an Albanian woman who like has a lot of hair on her body, like this product has like saved my life and improved my self-esteem. Like, as a black woman who like constantly gets razor bumps, like this is the only product, the only brand I'll ever use for XYZ. And I was like, oh my God, you actually have so much more space than you realize. You have such a bigger right to play with this audience, this community. You could do such meaningful, emotional, specific, purpose-driven engagements. They didn't, unfortunately, but it was like, wow. So I think when you really see what the meaning of the brand can be, starting from the products, right, and how it resonates and how people are actually talking about, feeling about it in their real lives, then it gives, you can open surprising avenues also. It's not just shutting them down. You can also find those avenues and really help make good choices about going through them.
But it has to be connected to the core of what that product does, right? Not just something we want it to do.
Ideally.
Yeah. What do we think about inflation? I mean, thinking about how that is the bane of every marketer's existence. No. Does that change the need to focus on purpose? Does that change how we focus on purpose?
You mean recession proofing?
Yeah, I can start. I think what's happening is that we're conflating purpose marketing and purpose strategy with CSR, right?
Yes.
And so to answer the inflation question, let's look at purpose the way dictionary.com, I think, is, or the most pedestrian definition, right? Why something exists. Why should you do something? What's the purpose of it, right? When you look at things this way, recession is going to be really interesting, right? Because I think we're living in a too much and not so good situation, right? There's so much of everything, so many products, so many brands, so much stuff on the shelf, on our feeds, in the media. Not everything is that good. And I don't know if there are Havas people here, but there's there are these such fun studies where we see 5 years, year after year, 70% of brands could disappear tomorrow and people wouldn't care. Same study from Havas says 58% of content by the top global leading brands was labeled by consumers as poor, not interesting, useless, right? So there's so much just not good stuff there. There's so many brands out there that are capturing space that they just don't deserve. And so recession is survival of the fittest. And you know what? Maybe not everyone should survive it. And that's a good thing, right? So, but brands that can go out there and say, this is not how I'm going to save humanity, but this is why I deserve to exist on this shelf or on your feed, right? This is the added value, the white space I'm adding to the world, and do that in marketing in a compelling way, in a way that entertains or compels consumers. Those are the only brands that deserve to survive. So I would say purpose is elevated in a downturn, but in the most rudimentary pedestrian definition of purpose.
The original definition.
Yeah, the original. Yeah.
I mean, for me, the two have nothing to do with each other. Having purpose, economic recession, up and downs comes every cycle. I mean, we've all seen a graph. So at the end of the day, building it into fabric or foundation of who you are. Like, everybody's not going to be Tom Shoes and launch a footwear company for which a good portion of proceeds go to Africa. But they don't struggle. That brand didn't struggle with purpose. It was a singular aim as to why it's going to exist, period. For legacy brands, they need to either go back to their roots or they need to figure out the new North Star. And most of them don't have it, minus Wall Street and P&Ls. So that's just the problem. But again, they're not understanding this future consumer does not care. Either get it or just lose. So a lot of brands just haven't chosen to win. So when I look at the fact that there's certain categories that have gone up in pricing but aren't feeling the effects of inflation, because I don't know why potato chips is costing $7 at 7-Eleven, let's be clear. It's like, what does that have to do? I mean, their purpose is, oh, we're gonna get it while it's getting as good and make the most money we've ever made. We're gonna live our best lives financially. Like, I get it, but $10,000 over on the RAV4, it just leaves me a little bit puzzled. I mean, look, these are machines, it's all a machine. And I think the purpose has nothing to do, it has much more to do with empathy and apathy of how you reflect in the marketplace, social good, what the constituents internally feel about the organization and what you're trying to project to a consumer. Because look, it's all about laws of attraction. This is why purpose matters. You want people to get along with you, work for you, buy for you. If you're dating, you want them to, you know what, with you. I mean, that's what it is. So I don't think when you look at the bare essence of why purpose matters and why everyone needs to have it, because human beings need it just as a North Star ideal, I don't understand why it's so difficult. I think the problem is purpose doesn't scale, it doesn't have reach tied to it, and it's not easily monetizable, which is where advertising has taken it. And I always remind people, marketing is the parent company, not advertising. And marketing is consumer first. And consumer first means you need to have some purpose as to why they buy. And I think that's part of what's gone off the rails. The wrong horse is leading. And until that gets restructured, we're kind of stuck in this conundrum of chasing profits and all these other things that are shallow. But again, this future consumer would be unforgivable.
So I think that what is happening, right, with like recession proofing, which is sure is a buzzword in everyone's inboxes and minds and hearts, is that a lot of marketers are focusing their efforts on down funnel activities, right? And you're seeing in product innovation, right, like all the way down the funnel. So you're seeing the skimflation happening. You know, you're seeing what feels like a social experiment gone wrong with pricing, right? It's like, you know, people are playing around like these pricing games and you know, couponing, things like that, very down funnel. I think it's a natural reaction because in times of uncertainty, you want to reduce risk and you want to like do things that seem to be like proven out, right? You kind of get like an immediate answer to your investment there. And so what I hope it does for the more upper funnel activities and things like purpose that have a longer timeline for return is that we get really good at measuring those things and like really good at measuring how those activities and investments impact the business. So like, what is our return on investment in, you know, in what we would call purpose-driven activities, and like, what's our return on impact as well? Like, how are we actually like measuring what that does? in a multidimensional way, right? Like, in terms of, how it impacts, employees, retention, how it impacts, of course, like consumers, loyalty, all of those things, looking at it more holistically. So my hope is that in this moment, if we care about continuing to invest in the organizations we said we would support, right, the good deeds we said we would do, the goals we would get to by 2030, right, then we are also investing in measuring those things and making sure that they aren't threatened with the fluxes that happen naturally, like, in the economy. And then I think that will, that to me will be like the new era of purpose, when we're really truly able to measure its effectiveness.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think the key takeaway here is that we are not in a post-purpose world. We are very much in a purpose world, but we have to figure out the right way to bring purpose to life. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
This has been great.
Questions.
We have 40 or 50 questions here. So, haven't consumer sentiments changed as well towards purpose? Do you think brands are navigating along with everyone else or out in front?
I think it depends, right? Like, it's such a broad question. I think we're all become obsessed and overconsumed with winning Gen Z, and that's why we're conflating any and all marketing activities with purpose. But the reality is, Gen Z has become far more sarcastic and even aggressive in some cases towards marketing and advertising. And we're seeing that in a lot of measures. They're 10 points under millennials in thinking brands are authentic. These are last 6 months number, right? They are, I think, 12 points down. I brought my stats, but I'm trying to remember. They're 12 points down in thinking that advertising is credible, right? So they'll play with it if it's entertaining, but they're not buying into it. They don't want purposeful ads. They want purpose-driven companies. So they're seeing they're seeing our lies, and they're laughing at us, honestly, on social. The fact that there are over 11.3 million posts on TikTok alone for, I can't remember the hashtag, but it's literally calling out brands that are using purpose for nothing. Or the last June, Pride Month, the trending meme on Twitter was, "This is why I partnered with." So all these influencers were posting, I'm gay, I'm closeted, I've always been afraid to come out. That's why this month I'm partnering with IKEA because they build the best clothes. This was trending all throughout of June. They're literally laughing at us, right? So consumer sentiment, I think, is really, if we're focusing on Gen Z, they're calling us out to wake up and really rail back the purpose insanity.
And they're not just calling us out, they're boycotting us, right? Consumers are 10 times more likely to boycott a product if they think that we're exploiting their sentiment. So they're making decisions with their wallets.
How about building purpose for a brand that's part of a multi-brand company where there might not be a clear corporate brand on top of it? How do you do that?
I'll take that one. So, because I work with many brands that are in that situation, that are part of like multinational, multi-brand companies. I think that it actually sometimes might be easier if they're like, let's see. So, I use this thing I call the big bowl metaphor, right? Like, so depending on as a strategist, right, when you are creating an architecture for a brand, for a company, depending on how many things you need to like fit in that architecture, you might end up with like a really big bowl, right? And you get it kind of like, it gets more shallow as you're building it, because like so many different things need to fit inside that bowl. So I think a lot of times what I do is I approach it and I think like, okay, how big does this bowl need to be for everything to fit in? It's like practical thing, right? And if like there's the corporation, the corporate purpose might need to be there and the bowl gets bigger, like this brand purpose and then the bowl gets bigger, right? And then like but these other brands have this purpose too, so the bowl gets a little bit smaller. So it's not a great answer, but it's a visual metaphor that I use when I'm trying to construct those different frameworks to figure out. So you're not necessarily like benefited or hindered by having that corporate purpose. I think it just changes like the shape of the architecture you need to create for that brand, because ultimately it is about that coherence. And then if they're happening simultaneously, which often is the case, right, then it becomes really important just to like know where you need to create space for that corporate purpose once it's set.
And just to add to that, I think that when you're developing a brand purpose and there is a corporate purpose, you need to make sure that there is no tangible disconnect between what you're putting out there for the brand and what the corporation stands for. I mean, if you look at what happened to Budweiser with the LGBTQ community, when they were all out there saying we support, but then the broader parent company was donating money to anti-causes. You got to be aware of that, and you have to know that consumers are going to find it and they're going to call you out for it.
We're almost out of time, but I can't resist this one. From a skeptic, is the new consumer really as purpose-driven as they claim, i.e. Gen Z values sustainability but buys shine?
Ooh, Albert, come on.
The $1 million question.
Yes.
Good for you.
Well, I mean, some of it is that those generations, you know, Gen Z, millennials, they have a plurality of identities. This is why the metaverse is going to be big, meaning what culminates in the flesh is society compressing what is acceptable. It's why we all walk in this room wearing certain type of clothing, okay? So when you start to think about their generation, they will live in multiple universes fluidly the way they live in technology devices fluidly. So do they appreciate shine? Yeah, the average Gen Z has more Chanel than most of in this room could have dreamt of by the time we were 30. But they found ways through consignment to get it, so they like the finer stuff, nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't mean they don't lack purpose on the other end. It means that they have an easier means of moving through multiple identities and how they identify themselves with the world and will project themselves in a way that we can't identify with mostly as Gen Xers and Boomers. We just don't understand that. We've been taught you have to be a thing. Their generation is like, no, I can be 10 things in one day. That's why when you think about the idea of a transgender movement, cross-dressing, we did it as an older generation for Halloween. Other than that, we are our normal selves. So that's 1 out of 365. They'll do it every day of the year and won't even care. So we can't comprehend why someone would do that and how they pull it off, and then they can literally step back and be this other self. So the idea that they can exist in multiple universes simultaneously at light speed is something we just struggle with. So in our mind, it's like, oh, you're not this, you're that. And they're like, no, we're all these things. Don't you get it? And that's part of the thing of them laughing at us, is the way that they can step into high-end fashion and then step out, and then step into purpose and cause and step out, and then step into hanging in a queer community and then step out, and then go heteronormative and step out. We have built our identities in a very linear fashion, and they move across the spectrum. And that's what's going to make purpose a bit of a mixing bowl for brands to figure out, because they can't pinpoint the exact target. But that's the fluidity of the world we live in today.
Thank you guys so much.